Actionable Agile with Daniel Vacanti.
The Azure DevOps Podcast is a show for developers and DevOps professionals shipping software using Microsoft technologies. Each show brings you hard-hitting interviews with industry experts, innovating better methods, and sharing success stories. Listen on to learn how to increase quality, ship quickly, and operate well. And now your host, Jeffrey Palermo.
Welcome to the show. I'm Jeffrey Palermo, your host. Make sure to check out www.azuredevops.show for past episodes and the show notes. And I'm excited that lots of people are taking me up on the invitation to speak virtually at your .NET user groups. Just last week, whenever you're listening to the show, I spoke for the Tulsa .NET user group and have many more coming up on the schedule. Speaking about DevOps, speaking about Blazor architecture, and the like. It's a lot of fun. If you run a .NET user group, I'd love to get on your schedule. And if you're tuning in for the first time on this podcast, the Azure DevOps Podcast is for developers who are shipping software with Microsoft technologies. And my goal for all of you, for all development teams, is to be able to move fast and deliver quality and run your systems with confidence. And if you have some specific issues that you need help with, well, that's what we do as a software architecture company, specializing in Microsoft development technologies. Now, today on the show, I have Daniel Vacanti, and he is a co-founder and CEO of ActionableAgile, and he's also one of the originators of the Kanban methodology. So, Daniel, welcome to the show. How are you, sir?
I'm doing very well, thanks. How are you doing? It's certainly an honor and a pleasure to be here, to be invited to be on your show, Jeffrey. So, thanks very much for that.
Well, thank you. To start out, you got to tell us the backstory. How did Kanban start?
Wow. You were supposed to warn me. That you were going to ask really tough questions right from the beginning. If we've only got 30 minutes, I don't know if we can if we can get into the whole backstory. There's a presentation, honestly, that I've been doing lately that kind of talks about the history of Kanban.
Oh, nice.
But just like in 30 seconds or the 25 words or less, the first Kanban team was at a company called Corbis in Seattle. Corbis, Corbis in Seattle. Interestingly enough, owned by Bill Gates. So as you can imagine, we used all Microsoft technologies at Corbis. And we started playing around with some techniques. And at the time, the practices that we were using, we didn't know Kanban, whatever, right? It's just these things that we were doing. And lo and behold, the practices evolved and turned into something that is now known as Kanban, in the software industry.
Awesome. Yeah, I see lots of DevOps teams using some of the methods from Kanban just when they think, man, we want to do continuous delivery, and the Scrum seems to have us deploy at sprint boundaries, but why don't we just deploy in the afternoon or tomorrow morning or whenever something's ready?
It's funny. A lot of people when they talk about DevOps, they talk about it from a technical practices perspective. And don't get me wrong, those are very important. But I see it as more of a reaction to flow, right? We over the years, we had put up these artificial boundaries between development and operations, right? And, there was this very strict handoff between, a development team and an operation teams, and both teams were incentivized differently. So, the knocking down the walls so that we can do things like, continuous delivery, continuous deployment, and all those, that's a flow thing. That's a Kanban thing in my world. That's to me, that makes much more sense than all of those technical engineering practices. So, yeah. I mean, it makes a ton of sense. I mean, it's absolutely why DevOps exists, I think, and why Kanban is a beautiful fit for it.
Well, you spend a lot of time thinking about software process and forecastability and predictability. And so what are the cliff notes when you think about that, and when you advise teams, what are some of the major recurring lessons that you tell everybody?
Yeah. The very first, any engineer out there, any knowledge worker out there, anybody who's ever worked for a customer ever, that the second you start working on something for them, the very first question that they are going to ask is, when will it be done?
Mm-hmm. Are you done yet?
Yeah, are you done it? You done it? You done it? When, when you're going to be done, right? Whether it's a fair question to ask, whether it's the right question to ask, that's the question that they will ask. And so predictability in our customers' minds anyway, predictability is the accuracy to which we can answer that question for them. Because that's really what they care about. Whether we as knowledge workers care about it, that's what our customers really care about. So that's when I talk about predictability, when I talk about forecasting, and to even a bigger degree, continuous improvement. That's what I'm thinking is how do we answer that question? When will it be done more accurately for our customers? And not only more accurately, but with a lot less effort. We don't necessarily have to get into the whole like story points estimating or even no estimates movement or any of that, right? We could probably just fill up several shows with those types of topics. But the point is more, you drive out uncertainty by actually doing the work. Mm-hmm. So how do we answer the question, when will it be done, as accurately as possible with as minimal effort as possible, so we can focus on the real thing, the real reason we're here, which is that delivery of customer value. So that's to me, that's really where the conversation starts is answering when will it be done. And there are so many offshoots from that. We can go in any direction depending on, I don't know if you have any particular interest.
Well, that is a huge question, because the customer would make follow-on decisions based on what they hear. If something, it'll be done tomorrow, well, that's very different from, I think that, I don't know if it'll be done next month or the month after. And they might just completely say, well, I don't have that much money to spend on it. So if your estimate may mean I pull the plug because I can't afford it.
And you're hitting on all the exact points, right? It all comes down to, even though I talk a lot about metrics and forecasting and predictability, really what I talk about is risk management, which you can't really say risk management in agile circles because it's not very sexy and people get scared by that. But that's really what I'm talking about is risk management. And Agile in particular, Agile loves to pride itself on focusing on business outcomes and delivering value, and those types of things. And to your exact point, in the customer's eyes, value is very, very dependent on, well, how long is it going to take? You're right. Something being done tomorrow has a much different value than something being done 6 months from now, potentially. And how do we manage that risk, and how do we manage, the uncertainty that surrounds, well, am I going to get it tomorrow versus am I going to get it six months from now? Crucially important questions for our customers that we need to recognize. It is our responsibility to answer those as well as we can for them, because they're the ones ultimately paying the bills.
Right. Well, if there's a new project team that's being either put together or starting new, sure, some organizations have tons of inertia around how they do project management, but with the growth of the field, there's tons of new developers coming in, new project managers, new teams being formed. So they're kind of putting in place process from scratch in a lot of cases. So for those people, is there a rule of thumb, or is there a general, hey, start here type of guidance that you would have for them?
So when we talk about the ability to forecast, we're going to quickly potentially cross over into some deep philosophical conversations,
which is fine.
When we talk about our ability to forecast and predictability and things like that, there has to be, if you want to be predictable, there has to be some notion of system stability. And without getting too far down the rabbit hole in terms of what stability means, what you're talking about is tremendous amounts of instability. Brand new team members coming, new requirements popping up all over the place, whatever.
Yeah.
It turns out that we can gracefully handle that type of instability. And to me, this is kind of where Kanban shines. By doing some simple things, like controlling work in progress, like focusing on flow principles, all of these things can help us to deal with a lot of that instability to give us some sense of stability, such that we can now trust the data that we're getting out of our system. So you're asking, okay, in this in this world of this tremendous instability, how do we get that? Well, number one, if you are not doing anything around explicitly controlling work in progress, then honestly, you use whatever estimation forecasting technique you want to. They will all be equally bad. But if we can start off by some explicit of controlling work in progress, now we've got a shot. And so I guess I kind of take a little bit different approach than I think most people in the metrics and forecasting space. Most people are focused just on the data itself. I'm a big believer. This is something I steal from a good friend of mine. His name's Frank Vega. He says, your policies shape your data and your data shape your policies. What he means by that is if you don't have your process figured out, then you can't trust the data coming off your process. So figure out your process first. Once you've got your process, now we can start taking that data and start make some forecasts. But that's just step number one. And step number two, to fully answer your question without rambling too much, step number two would then be, because we recognize we're in this world where things are constantly changing and things are in flux, there has to be this concept of continuous forecasting. So just like in the DevOps world, we talk about continuous deployment and continuous delivery. There's goodness in getting things out there as frequently as possible and discovering where their issues are. Forecasting is exactly the same way. The second that we get new information, we need to rerun our forecasts. Old school PMOs, they want you to spend a whole bunch of time up front putting together a plan, and then that's the plan, and we have to work the plan, and the plan is a plan, and you said the plan was right. In Agile, in knowledge work, it doesn't work that way, right? We have to embrace that uncertainty, and we have to allow ourselves to be able to, okay, we've got some new information, let's reforecast. So, like I said, I hope I didn't ramble too much there, but that's...
No, this makes total sense. An old analogy popped into my mind about highway gridlock, that if you have, if the highway is under capacity and you have one car on it, the car can go as fast as it wants to. It's not going to get slowed down. But once you get above, I think I heard, once you get above 80-something% of highway capacity, you have a parking lot.
Exactly right.
And that the highway can never function at actual 100% capacity, because that means it's covered bumper to bumper with vehicles. And until you know the capacity of your team, you
exactly,
can't govern that.
Yeah, and again, if we relate this back to software in general, we talk about what do CPUs look like when they're at 100% utilization? What do networks look like when they're at 100% utilization? What do database connections look like when they're at 100% utilization? Right? I mean, nothing's getting done at that point. And you're much better off managing that capacity so that we do have some slack, so that we are getting that flow through the process. That's a much, much better world to be in than, hey, let's try and shove as much stuff as we can into this process and pray that something good's going to happen.
So for the managers listening, as a manager, I might say, well, the developer's only going to be doing one thing at a time anyway. So what does it matter how many cards, whatever you happen to call your item of work, how many cards we put in the in development column? They're just taken off the top anyway. So what is, what should they know? What are these things that they're missing, not getting the right result?
And there's the corollary to that too, because what you said is exactly right. The corollary to that too is, well, it all has to get done anyway, as well, right? It all has to get done anyway. So who cares how we work on it? My answer to that generally, and this is where it's difficult, and this is probably why I'm not a millionaire, because I haven't figured out how to answer this question yet. But the flow principles that we talk about are, I like to say this, they're unintuitive to the point of being counterintuitive, especially with managers, right? Their whole career, managers have been taught to think a certain way. And I think us as human beings, we're kind of raised to think a human way. We're raised to think in terms of a couple of assumptions. One, like, obviously, the more stuff you work on, the more you're going to get done. Well, that's actually not true. And there's a lot of evidence that that's not true. A lot of people also think, well, the sooner you start something, the sooner it will get done. That's not true either. And so managers kind of, whether they know it or not, they've got those kind of, assumptions built into the back of their head. And it's like, oh, this important thing popped up. We need to start on it right away. When maybe a much better strategy is, okay, well, there's something that's in progress right now. Let's finish that first. Hopefully we can finish that first. and then pull this new thing in. From a predictability perspective, that's a much you wouldn't think that it is, believe it or not, but it is a much better strategy. Managing things that's way. And I think so. That's what I'm saying. It's dropping what we as humans believe as intuitive, because most of this stuff is not intuitive.
Many thanks to our podcast sponsor, ClearMeasure. ClearMeasure is a software architecture company that empowers clients' development teams to be self-sufficient, moving fast, delivering quality, and running their systems with confidence. Whether starting a new project or developing new technologies or techniques, ClearMeasure sets up your team to deliver world-class results. Learn more at www.clearmeasure.com. ClearMeasure, empowering software delivery.
So with computer science, which I do like the term science because it's more about the scientific method than a mathematical proof, where I guess the first step of a scientific method is to guess at something. You make a hypothesis.
Make a hypothesis, right? Exactly right.
You come up with an idea, you put your finger in the wind and said, I bet you if we did this software feature, it would increase revenue or decrease costs or some other good business outcome, right?
Yep.
It's a guess.
It's a total guess. Yes, total guess.
Whether you have somebody called a product owner or product manager or whatnot, somebody's making a guess that something is beneficial to prioritize.
Absolutely.
So given that, it seems like every software organization on the planet is going to have more possible work to do than the capacity will ever be on the team.
That's the fundamental problem. Yes, that's the fundamental problem. Yeah.
And so unless there's an intentional governor, it's almost guaranteed to be development gridlock?
Absolutely.
Is that what I mean?
Absolutely. I mean, you're the way I kind of like to talk about it is you're instituting a denial of service attack on yourself. That's really what you're doing. And there's a wonderful book about this. You've probably heard of it. There's an author called Annie Duke, and she's got this book called Thinking in Bets, kind of to your exact.
I heard of that book. We'll put it in the show notes.
I think so Annie Duke, Thinking in Bets, and that's this whole idea of, whether or not these product managers that you're talking about or whatever, they're gambling, right? They're essentially playing poker because it's just you said it's a hypothesis, it's a guess. I think this thing is valuable, and you're right. Ideas are easy. It's really, really easy for me as a product manager to come up with 100 things that I think, hey, God, if we only had these things, the product would be awesome, right? And to me, that's kind of the essence of flow. When we talk about flow, the concept of flow, and I'm going to steal thunder from a good friend of mine. His name is Pratik Singh, that I work with. He would say that your job is to figure out how wrong you are as quickly as possible. So if you've got these 100 items, obviously not all 100 are going to be valuable. You probably think they are, but they won't be. That's just the nature of the beast. So how can we start pulling these things in and work them as quickly as possible so we can figure out we're wrong and we can adjust based on on that feedback that we're getting. That's the best way to think about it. And when you do that, to get to your point about the governor, the best strategy, if I have 100 things in my backlog, the best strategy is not to start all 100 of those things all at the same time. That's kind of waterfall world. And I think we've proved that waterfall in general doesn't work. Much better strategy is to start just a few, just enough, just the amount that we really truly have capacity for, and get those through the process as quickly as possible, and then adjust based on those learnings.
Okay. So that seems to me like a big idea. Even for people who haven't read a book on Kanban or haven't gone into any details, and I have, so I know some buzzwords like work in process. But even without even going into that seems like one of the big ideas. If managers are listening out there, to intentionally throttle just a small handful or one at a time work to the development team instead of just putting everything on the board.
Yep. Exactly right. Yes. That's the secret sauce, and again, it's the antithesis of everything that we believe is true, right? This idea that, oh, wait, I'm only going to have my development teams work on one or two or just a few things instead of 100 things. that just freaks people out. And it's really, really hard for them to, to get over that. But if they can, the results are just tremendous.
So I wonder, it would force development team managers to look at it and say, oh, this might not all get done by this time period. And then, of course, someone higher up say, no, it all has to get done. Well, the reality is they might not have capacity to even get it, or the system or the architecture and the software to have it all done.
Right. Yeah. And this gets back to the whole point about risk management is, okay, if there's a way that we can get data off of our system and we can start having I like that people get mad at me when I say this, but we can start having an adult conversation around really what realistically are our chances. We've got all these things we want to get done, and we've got this release coming up. Realistically, what are our chances of it getting done? If we start all 100, maybe our chances are 20%, versus if we start only 2 or 3, our chances are 80 or 90%, and start talking about it that way. And so that the higher ups can start making decisions around how much risk are they willing to live with, and start managing, based on that risk. To me, that's a much healthier way of going about it, because saying things like, well, it all has to get done, that's just not living in the real world. Because as you said, we may not have capacity, we may not be able to do it, it may not all be valuable. There's just so many things that we don't know. So let's approach it more from a risk-based perspective.
And I remember being in one of those projects really early in my career, where, man, this memory still sticks out at me. Where I remember someone in management saying, "Oh, it has to happen. It needs to get done. We need to buckle down." And of course, somebody in project management started floating the idea of, "Hey, do we need to go to 6 day a week? Schedules. What do we need to do?" Like really getting on board. And myself as an individual developer at that point early in my career, we were talking like we just told each other, this isn't going to happen anyway. We could work 9 days a week, and it's not going to happen there. And so it's like, okay, but nobody wanted to hear that either, because that was just negative talk. But we need to get to a better management answer. You don't want to go back to management, because this podcast then becomes worthless if the message is, oh, you just need to accept failure. You just need to accept that you're not going to be able to do stuff. You're not going to be able to be bold. Yeah. So how do we turn around so that this is enabling to get good stuff done, instead of just face the reality you're not going to get stuff done?
Yeah, and that's why I think we've come full circle in our discussion. And that's why this whole idea of let's start a few things. Let's start validating these hypotheses. You said they're guesses. Let's just start a few things and let's get them to done, and let's start seeing. Because I'd much rather hand my customers something real, something valuable, so they can give me feedback, so I can keep iterating and keep improving. The last thing I want to do is finish 100 things, hand it to the customer, and the customer say, wow, yeah, I don't want any of that. I wouldn't, I don't want to pay for any of that. And so to me, the enabling thing is, if we can get stuff in the hands of our customers faster, that's the biggest risk mitigation of all, right? Again, this is the whole point of DevOps in my world. That's the biggest risk mitigation of all, is let's get stuff to our customers faster, because while we think we know what we need to do, we really don't. And the only way to know is real tangible things that our customers can try and can test and can give us feedback on. So to me, that's the light at the end of the tunnel. Is don't get overwhelmed by the mountain of work that's left to do in your backlog. Try to focus more on, okay, what are the small things that we can do today just to get something done. And pretty soon you'll get to the point where you start ignoring that backlog, because the backlog will always be there, and whatever. It is what it is. But
inbox zero is a myth.
Exactly,
backlog zero.
And interestingly enough, I think you and I had very, very similar experiences early on in our development careers. I started out as a developer, and that was the biggest reason why I went into more management, and especially process management. Was I got sick and tired of people handing me schedules that I had no say in, that said, oh, you have to do all this stuff. And then because they planned incorrectly, now I'm starting to work 6 days, 7 days, holidays canceled, all of this stuff. There's a better way. And that's why I'm glad for podcasts like yours to start surfacing some of, hopefully, these better ways of working.
Yeah. One of the wisest managers that I've had the pleasure of working with kept the business goals baked into the backlog. Where I've seen so many times where the executives at the business say, "Hey, we're trying to, we're trying to do this initiative," and then product management would distill that into their guesses about what it would take, and then those guesses would become the work in the backlog, and the developers never heard the raw language about what the business strategy was that was being attempted.
Right.
And so this manager took the strategy statements directly from the executives and put them as the headliners in the work, and says, from a business perspective, we're trying to accomplish this. And that way everybody had a chance to say, wait a minute, even if we did all of this, it's probably not going to achieve that strategy, but 80-20 rule tends to be everywhere. But if we did this little slice, and then I remember somebody came up with something and said, we're not going to be able to do it. However, if we do this piece in the software, and then we hire a temp contract administrative assistant to do these other things in double shifts, I think we'd be there.
Yeah. I mean, but yeah,
we don't have to automate everything.
Exactly right. I mean, I'm sure you're familiar with the book Lean Startup, but that's really the whole point of that book is how do we figure out that, what is that truly valuable thing as quickly as possible? Because, we're going out and we're spending millions or billions of dollars developing things that our customers don't want.
Okay. So there's some people listening here that say, okay, great. I'm hearing this general way of thinking. I'm on board. Yep. Now what do I do? I'm about to start a project. I have a lot of flexibility. I can kind of put some things in place. And even though it doesn't depend on tools and rule, they're thinking, just tell me what to do so I can do it. So everybody's got a tool these days that can visualize some sort of board with vertical columns and things like that. If you were kind of help setting up a team from scratch, and you are forming, so you do have some instability, but it's like, okay, let's start here. Do you have a favorite set of columns or statuses? Do you have a favorite number of items to put in each one? What are some of the normal things you say, hey, why don't we start here? We don't have any data yet, but let's just start here and then go from there.
Yeah. So I don't, maybe not as, as detailed as all that, but I do have I definitely do have some heuristics, or some places where maybe people should start. And this whole idea of if we want to drive, if we care about predictability and we care about continuous improvement, the very first thing that we need to decide is, what is our system, and more specifically, the boundaries of our system. So the very first place really you have to start with is, okay, as a group, what do we consider work to? Where do we consider work to have started, and where do we consider work to have finished? Right? What are the boundaries of the process that we have under our control that we're really trying to operate? Right? To me, that's key. If you don't have that, forget about it. So we have the place at which work starts, the place at work finishes. Now that I have that, or now that we as a team have that, I really do think there are just two very simple rules that you should apply. And it will get you most of the way there. The first, I'm going to go backward, by the way, okay. From least important to most important. The first thing is control work in progress, which what we've talked about. And it might sound strange that a Kanban guy is saying controlling work in progress is maybe not as important as you might think. It isn't, but you still do. But between those boundaries, you still have to have some control over how many things we're working on. Right? It can't be 100 things. Can it be one thing, two thing, three, whatever it is? Okay. But the more important thing, if I was to give any advice to any team starting out, the much more important thing between those boundaries is pay attention to the age of items. How long have these items been in progress? Constantly evaluate. Every day. If you're doing daily scrums, if you're doing daily stand-ups, whatever you're doing, every day you should be looking at the age of these items, and are these things flowing the way that we expect them to? Because if stuff should be getting through our process in 6 or 7 days, but I've got an item that's been in here for 43 days, that's a pretty big red flag that, hey, something's wrong, something needs to be done. Honestly, I would start with age and kind of go from there. But it really depends on drawing those boundaries around your process.
Okay. So it sounds like regardless of tool that people are using, we need a place for the starting point. We need a place of the backlog that's not considered in progress, or just that's not considered we've actually started. That, hey, yeah, anybody in product management can come up with ideas and can put them in here, but that doesn't mean that some people call it icebox, some people call it backlog, whatever
it is. Yep. Exactly.
Okay, so you're saying, but once we get past that, then it's considered to have been approved and said, okay, now go forth and execute. And then the done column is now it's out of the development system.
Yep. Exactly. Whatever those boundaries are. Yes. Start with that, and then monitor age in between those 2 points. And I think you'd be very, very surprised at the conversations that get generated just by doing that. I know consultants have we get a bad rap for oversimplifying things. It's so simple. It's so simple. But in terms of bang for the buck, I haven't found anything simpler, better, more effective than what I just told you. It might exist. I don't want to say that something more effective doesn't, but that's what I think.
Now, have you found that some of the common tools don't have a report built in to give you the age? What do you, like when you're coming into a fresh situation, what do you do to quickly get those ages?
Yeah. And so, I mean, there's 2 answers to that. And that if we talk, I know you didn't necessarily want to anchor us in terms of the timing of this podcast, but there's pre-COVID world and there's post-COVID world, that we need to talk about. Because to your point, again, most tools do struggle with this concept of age. They're getting better. But like, I hate to pick on Jira, but I know a lot of people like to pick on Jira, but so I'll just pick on Jira. But I mean,
it's used in tons of places. So
I mean, yeah. It's like any tool. Yeah, any tool is good, any tool is bad, depending on how you use it. But Jira in particular, they will monitor age of items, but only in a particular column. You can't see the total, or not very easily see the total age. I'll be honest with you, I don't know about Azure DevOps and how they monitor age. But the tools are really not there. And so that's what I was saying. Pre-COVID world, it was fairly simple. If we had, if we're talking about agile and co-located teams and everything, you would have a Kanban board with a whiteboard, and you literally just put tick marks up on the Post-it notes. And so for every day it's on the board, you put a tick mark on it. Gotcha. So you can easily count those tick marks. Very, 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 very easy. In post-COVID world, where now we're 100% virtual and all these things, now your point about tooling becomes exponentially more important. And there are very few tools that do it. Shameless plug, Actionable Agile is one of those tools that will monitor aging for you.
Well, I think that for people who struggle with that concept, you just quickly interview and just say, hey, do you know everything? Do you know about everything that's on the board? They would say no or yes. And if it's under control, then they know it's on the board. But if it's we need to have a board review so that we can go and set eyes on these things that we haven't even looked at in weeks.
Right.
You're kind of on the other end of that spectrum, I imagine.
Yeah, exactly. Because I mean, if it hasn't been touched for weeks, why is it even there? Right? Why is it even on our board? Let's get it off. And
oftentimes, between someone has an idea and it's actually done, there's going to be non-trivial conceptual requirements and design work, and even before we're ready to write code. Do you include all of those things as as work in process, or do you make any subdivisions?
Well, in classic consultant speak, I will say it depends. Right? It's if we talk about Kanban specifically, my personal preference is to get teams to start with the things, draw those boundaries, as I was talking about, draw those boundaries fairly conservatively around the things that we know for sure that we can control. and get pretty good at doing what I call Kanban between the lines. When I talk about drawing those boundaries, I'm like, okay, we're going to do Kanban between the lines. Believe it or not, it's fairly simple to get going with Kanban and start doing this Kanban between the lines things. But then, and this is what you're talking about, the much more interesting conversations, once we've drawn those boundaries, the much more interesting conversations are, okay, what happens just beyond those boundaries, right? What happens upstream before work comes in, or what happens downstream once we consider work to have finished? And over time, what I would like to see teams do is expand, just ever expand those boundaries outward, either upstream or downstream, so that we can start out getting a much more holistic view of what's going on. I know there's a lot of hype around business agility. That's kind of a big word, within the past, couple of years. And that's what I'm talking about is true end-to-end business agility. If we can go all the way from concept to cash in terms of our managing work in progress, that's great. But I don't know that I would necessarily start there. So like I said, draw those boundaries fairly conservatively around the stuff that we can control, and then start expanding from there.
Awesome. Well, hey, man, this has been fascinating. I appreciate you coming on the show and sharing for the listeners all about process and forecasting and predictability, which is not a topic we cover in one episode, but hopefully we made a dent.
Maybe. I hope so. I hope this isn't a wonderful cure for insomnia for some of your listeners. You guys are listening while you're trying to sleep. But anyway, I want to say, again, thank you very much for the opportunity to be here. I was really, really glad when I got the email from you and said, hey, come on the show. Because as you can see, I love talking about this stuff. So really do appreciate the opportunity.
Awesome. And where can listeners find you and contact you?
So my Twitter handle is at Dan Vacanti, DanVacanti, all one word. Or that's probably one of the website is actionableagile.com, or my email address, daniel@actionableagile.com.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for being on the show.
Well, thank you very much. Thanks for doing this. Thanks for all the hard work of putting this on.
And until next time, keep shipping.
You've been listening to the Azure DevOps Podcast, a show for developers and DevOps professionals shipping software using Microsoft technologies. Go to www.azuredevops.show for show notes and other episodes. On behalf of your host, Jeffrey Palermo, and our sponsors, thanks for listening, and may God bless you.